Hello everyone. We are here presenting our final presentation on impact of COVID-19 on food production and humans, guided by Professor Dr. Amy Gates for the course STAT 5000. Moving to the contents, each topic is presented by individual. Now, introduction. We have studied in this presentation or in this report that impact of COVID-19 on global economy, shifts in demand, biggest challenges for the poor countries. The aim of this study was to gain insight the impacts of the COVID-19 on food production, resulting in human life around the world. Production of the food in developed and developing countries compared to other countries. And COVID-19 took many lives and created complication for others. Moving to the data collection, data has been collected and stored in CSV format from World Health Organization and Food and Agriculture Organization statistics. Details about the data sets are below. We also tried to answer this, these questions, and this study is concluded on this. Moving to the next.
So in the data processing, there are few attributes that are not required. So as these attributes have more null values and are not required, we remove some of the attributes from the data set. And for the attributes like cases underscore 100K and deaths underscore 100K, we replace the null values with the median. As when we try to replace the null values with the mean, these values are negatively skewed. So in that case, we replace them with median values. So next slide, please. So when it comes to outlier treatment, the values in the attributes that there are some values in the attributes that lies far away from the rest of observations. So in that case, for the cases underscore 100K and deaths underscore 100K, we have to remove some of the outliers to get the better results. Next slide, please.
So coming to the exploratory data analysis, we usually perform this to get to know something more about the data set, to get to know about each column in a data set. Next slide, please. So from this, we could usually see the maximum number of new cases, what was the maximum of new deaths, what was the time it went through customs, what were the number of deaths, what were the number of overall cases and everything. Next slide, please. So coming to the univariate analysis, we performed on the 6 columns. So if we just look at the cases underscore 100K, we could see that the count of around 10K cases were recorded more number of times than the other cases. And if we look at the deaths underscore 100K, we could usually see that the death count of nearer to 100 were recorded more number of times compared to the other death counts. Next slide, please. So we perform bivariate analysis on 2 columns. It is usually done to know the relationship between the 2 columns. So here we perform for items and the year. So we could see that the cereal production was more in the year 2015 compared to the other food item production. And if we compare the year 2015 and 2019, we could see that, for example, the sugar crops production was less in 2015 compared to 2019. Next slide, please. So multivariate analysis. From this, we could get to know that the number of new cases or new deaths were more in the year 2020 compared to other years. And we could also see that the number of cumulative deaths was more in the year 2022. Next slide, please. So for this, we perform for the food production data set. So from the graphs, we could see that the food production of cereals was more in every year compared to the other food items. Next slide, please.
Coming to relative probability distribution, as a probability distribution is linked to relative frequency distribution, let's talk a bit about relative frequency. Relative frequency indicates how often a specific kind of event occurs within the total number of observations. Coming to relative frequency distribution, it shows the proportion of total number of observations associated with each value or class of values. So as we can see in the slide, we have applied relative probability distribution for our data set. For the graphs, we can see that mean is greater than median. So we can say that they are positively skewed. Next slide, please. Here we can see the pie charts, which shows export trade policies, import trade policies, and vaccine policies per country in the year 2020, 2021, and 2022. And all the other graph shows that they are positively skewed. Next slide, please.
We could respond to inquiries on measure of center and variability of data given numeric data distribution. Measure of center or central tendency is a single number used to describe a set of numeric data. We can use different measures like mean, median to represent the center of data with a single number. Measure of variability is a value used to describe the spread of a data set. The variation can also be expressed with a value more simply by finding the range or difference between the highest and lowest values. It can also be expressed using the standard deviation or variance. The left picture is the histograms with different bin sizes of the food production data set and COVID-19. The number of item meat total shows positively skewed geometric distribution. The figure shows different bin sizes for the column item meat total with bins 5, 25, 40, 50 respectively. From the summary of the column, we can see that mean is greater than median, which shows positively skewed. The pictures on the right are the histograms with different bin sizes of the annual trade announcement tally data set. The number of new trade policies issued per country year displays a positively skewed geometric distribution. Most countries issued no new recorded trade policies from the years of 2021 to 2022. And the number of trade policies issued by countries which did issue new policies is distributed geometrically. Nevertheless, the number of trade policies issued by each country increased dramatically in 2022 after the onset of COVID-19. The geometric nature of this distribution persists from year to year, even as mean, median, and interquartile ranges.
So for some of our hypothesis tests, we wanted to check whether there was a significant change between the mean food stability of countries compared to the high income and low income countries. Out of the 113 countries in this data set, 38 were classified as high income and 19 were classified as low income. We tested the means from the years 2017 and 2021, 1 year from before and 1 year from after the pandemic hit. We can see that in these groups, they were both statistically different compared to the mean, and that this gap widened from 2017 to 2021, according to their T and Z test values, respectively. On to the next slide, please. For the COVID cases, we tested the cases in 2020. We can see that the high income countries had more cases per 100,000 people, and the low income groups had significantly lower cases with a t-test of -189. This is explained through more of how lower income or developing countries don't have as many densely populated areas, and therefore it doesn't transmit COVID as much. Next slide.
So for our other hypothesis, we wanted to see if the onset of COVID had a significant impact on the number of trade policies issued annually. So by running a chi-square test of variance, we found that there was significant variation in the number of trade policies issued annually, with a p-value of effectively 0. And we then ran a t-test using the sample population of after two populations, one being the years before COVID and the other one being the years after the onset of COVID. And there we found another significant difference in the number of trade policies with p less than 0.05. And so we found that COVID did significantly alter the number of trade policies. All right.
So we have gone through multiple topics from the start. So I will give a quick overview or the summary of the results, what we have gone through. So firstly, the COVID-19 datasets has been performed with the univariate and the multivariate analysis. So univariate analysis is done with 6 different columns, and we have find that the frequency and the distributions of the columns. And from the multivariate analysis, the key findings are that the maximum cases and deaths are in the 2020 year, and the highest cumulative cases are in the year 2022. And the maximum number of death cases I could found is that in 2020. So if you go to the next slide, about the food production datasets, we have performed 3 different analysis: the univariate, bivariate, and the multivariate analysis, and we could see that there is a key finding is that the maximum production of items is in the cereals, and from the data explorations, we could see that the most of the charts have been positively skewed and under the geometric distribution. Next slide, please. So we have 3 different hypothesis testing, and the first one is that the food security environment scores. And here we have performed a z-test for the high income group, and we could see the result. And the conclusion is that we have to reject the Hull hypothesis. And we could see the low income group with the performed with the t-test, and we could see the results, and we could conclude that we have to reject the null hypothesis. Going to the next slide. So the trade policies before and after the COVID-19, and we could see that the use case is mentioned, and the conclusion if we found is that we cannot go ahead with this hypothesis, and we reject the null hypothesis. Next slide, please.
So we can conclude that though we saw a good growth in world trade flows, the accumulated losses were not yet gained by the end of 2021. So there was an increase in trade flow. There was an increase in the food volatility as the as there is an increase in trade flows. We can also see that the food was not was impacted much greater extent in many developed countries, though the people were affected or not affected by the COVID. There was a the volatility which is higher in low income countries is expected to persist in the medium term due to multiple global and domestic factors. Structural factors contributing to the volatility, including rising population and change in diets, increasing intertwined relations between food and energy prices. And these are the references we used in our project.